Hello everyone, it's your local emergency manager, and today I wanted to do a book review. The book I'm going to review is The Assyrian Church of the East, Beginner's Guide. So I read this a couple months ago. I've read a few books since I've read this, but I really enjoyed this book. I agreed with 99% of it. The Assyrian Church of the East, as a Catholic, the Assyrian Church of the East is very similar to us. Throughout the book, I made some highlights and some comments. I'd like to share those with you. So one thing I highlighted and I wrote yes next to it was the liturgy celebrated in Syriac emphasizes the mystery and transcendence of divine worship. The use of ancient hymns and prayers connects congregants to their historical roots, creating a sense of community and reverence. So I completely agree with that. It reminded me of the traditional Latin Mass. A lot of the people don't understand why we go to a Mass that's in Latin, but Latin is an easy language to pick up on. And the mystery and transcendence of this divine worship, including its ancient hymns and prayers, connects the congregants to their historical roots, creating a sense of continuity and reverence. And yeah, I totally agreed with that. Next, it says the hymns and prayers and chants composed in Syriac continue to evoke a connection to the church's ancient origins, creating a profound spiritual experience for congregants. The linguistic tradition also serves as a unifying factor for the global Assyrian Christian community. So I also agree with that. That's like a mirror to the Catholic Church, where the hymns and prayers and chants composed are in Latin and continue to evoke a connection to the church's ancient origins, creating a profound spiritual experience for congregants. This linguistic tradition also serves a unifying factor for the global for the global Catholic community, Catholic Christian community. So yes, I agree. Total mirror. Next it says its enduring presence in liturgy and scholarship underscores its significance as a vessel of faith and a bridge between past and present. Agreed. Catholic Church, exactly the same. Let's go on. So for this next part, I wrote next to it, agreed, kind of. So it says, one of the most significant contributions to the synods was the standardization of the church's liturgy and practices. As Christianity spreads across vast and cultural diverse territories, uniformity became a pressing concern. So I agree with that to an extent. So in the Catholic Church, we have the Roman Rite, and I agree that that should be, standardized and uniform. But there's a lot of also diversity in the Catholic Church that I think should stay diverse, such as the Gallican rites, the Lyonese, the Mozarabic, the Ambrosian, the Bragan rites, and those are the Western Church. And then the Eastern, such as the Chaldean Church, the Byzantine Catholic Church, which is Eastern Orthodox in communion with Rome. Chaldean Church is Assyrian Church of the East in communion with Rome. The Maronites are also beautiful. The unique thing about the Maronites is that there aren't any Maronites outside the Catholic Church because they all came into the Catholic Church. There are Oriental Orthodox in communion with Rome, such as the Armenian Catholic Church, and so on. So I think that's why I wrote agreed, kind of. It should be uniform whenever it comes to certain rites. Like if you're going to be a Novus Ordo rite under the Roman Rite, it needs to be uniform everywhere you go. If you're going to do the traditional Latin Mass under the Roman Rite, it needs to be uniform everywhere you go. So I agree with that to an extent. Okay, so now we're getting into wrong territory. So I mark wrong in pink. I think this is the only part I marked wrong in the whole book. That's why I said 99% of this stuff I agree with. So let's get into that. So the thing I highlighted and wrote wrong was Nestorius and his followers preferred the term Christotokos to the Mother of God to avoid suggesting that Mary's role extended to the divine nature of Christ. This distinction, subtle yet significant, became a dividing line in early Christianity and shaped the Assyrian Church of the East theological framework. So, as a Catholic, yes, I believe Christ had two natures. He was fully God and fully man. And I'm fine with dividing his two natures as long as at the end of the day, they come back together and create fully God, fully man. I'm fine with calling Mary the Christotokos as long as she's also the Theotokos. So she's the Christotokos and Theotokos. The Assyrian Church of the East has a problem with that. They don't like the term Theotokos, and they just call her the Christotokos. And that's my only problem and issue in this book. But we'll go back into things I agree with. So it says, later on in the book, that by affirming the distinctiveness of Christ's human nature, believers could more fully appreciate the significance of his suffering and death. At the same time, the recognition of his divine nature offered hope and reassurance of his power to redeem and transform. So I agree with that. Acknowledging his human nature relates him to us, but in acknowledging his divine nature offers hope and reassurance to his power to redeem and transform. Agreed. You just got to make sure that by the end of the day they are together. You can separate them as long as they come back together. And the Assyrian Church of the East has a hard time bringing those two things back together. That's the only disagreement. And then it says, for the Assyrian Church of the East, the doctrine of two was not about division, but distinction. It was an attempt to articulate the mystery of the Incarnation in a way that preserved the fullness of both Christ's divinity and humanity. I wrote here that I agree with this, but you need to combine them to have the full truth. Mary is the Christotokos and the Theotokos. And then on the next page here, I wrote, agreed again. It says, faith and tradition are inseparable in the Assyrian Church, each informing and enriching the other. For the Church, faith is not merely an individual experience, but a communal journey rooted in traditions passed down through generations. These traditions provide a framework for understanding and expressing the mysteries of the faith. Agreed. That's also a doctrine of the Catholic Church. Faith and tradition are inseparable in the Catholic Church, each informing and enriching each other. Agreed. So we don't disagree on that. The Assyrian Church of the East and the Catholic Church. So there are some larger blocks I highlighted, but we won't get into that. Here's another smaller block. It says the Eucharist, far from being a solitary event, becomes the spiritual foundation upon which the life of the Church and its members is built. I wrote in all caps, Amen, because the Catholic Church agrees with that doctrine. Next, later on down the page, it says, feast days hold a special place within this calendar. These celebrations commemorate the lives of saints, martyrs, and the significant events in Christian history. I wrote same in all caps because same, we agree. A couple pages later, it's talking about the role of hymns and chanting. It says the choir's role is not simply to perform, but to guide the community in offering praise. Agreed. So in a lot of non-Catholic Christian churches, the choir is there to perform, almost like a concert. There's no altar. There's just a stage with guitars, bass, drums, whatever instruments they can get up there, and they're performing a worship song. But that goes against Catholic teaching in many ways. Even though in a lot of Catholic youth groups we do allow this to happen. During the liturgy, during the Mass, the choir is there to guide the community in offering praise and not simply just there to perform. So we agree with that doctrine. The next section talks about liturgical vestments and their symbolism. The book says liturgical vestments in the Assyrian church are more than ceremonial attire. They are visual expressions of the sacred. Each garment, from the priest's alb to the bishop's mitre, carries layers of meaning, symbolizing the roles and responsibilities of the clergy. These vestments transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, setting the tone of worship and emphasizing the sacredness of the liturgy. I feel like all the apostolic churches would agree with that statement. The Catholic Church, the Oriental Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, the Assyrian Church of the East, the Polish National Church, the Old Catholic Church of, I think it's pronounced Utrecht, and Scranton, would all agree with that. Even Orthodox Anglicans, conservative Anglicans, would agree with that. But let's move on. Next page. It says, the colors of the vestments also carry significance, changing with the liturgical seasons. White is used for celebration, symbolizing joy and purity, while red is reserved for feasts of martyrs and the Holy Spirit, evoking themes of sacrifice and fire. These colors create a visual rhythm that aligns with the themes of the liturgy, enhancing the worship experience. The preparation and wearing of vestments are acts of devotion in themselves. Before donning each piece, the clergy often recites prayers dedicating the service to God. This ritual underscores the sacredness of their role and the importance of approaching the liturgy with humility and reverence. Through their vestments, the clergy become living symbols of the sacred, guiding the congregation into the mystery of the worship. Absolutely. All the apostolic churches would agree with that I just listed. Agreed. Now you're starting to see why I agree with 99% of this book. The next page, this section talks about daily prayer and practices and their spirituality. It says daily prayer is more than a discipline, it's a way of life. It teaches the faithful to approach each moment with awareness of God's presence, fostering the spirituality that permeates all aspects of life. Agreed. All the apostolic churches would agree with that. Even most high Protestant churches, I would say. High church Protestant churches is what I was trying to say. So this section talks about the use of sacred spaces in worship. The sacred spaces of the Assyrian church are not just buildings. They are living expressions of faith and devotion. From humble chapels to grand cathedrals, these spaces are designed to inspire reverence and connect worshipers to the divine. Every element, from the architecture to the artwork, serves a purpose, drawing the faithful into deeper experience of worship. Absolutely. I feel like definitely the Catholic Church agrees with that, and we agree with that. All the apostolic churches, again, I think it was 5. Let's see: Oriental, Eastern Catholic, Old Catholic, Polish National Church. Well, let's just say 6, because we'll also include conservative Anglicans that have apostolic succession through the Old Catholic Church. So those 6 churches would agree with that, and I would even say that high church Protestants agree with that the architecture is sanctifying. Whenever it talks about theological writings and commentaries, it says, the Assyrian Church has a rich tradition of theological writings and commentaries, reflecting centuries of intellectual engagement with scripture and doctrine. These texts are not merely academic exercises, they are explorations of faith, written to guide, inspire, and clarify. They form a library of wisdom that has shaped the church's theology and spirituality. Writers like Ephraim the Syrian and Narsai, I think that's how they pronounce it, stand out as pillars of this tradition. Agreed. yeah, the Catholic Church would agree with that wholeheartedly, and so would those 6 apostolic churches, and maybe even the High Church Protestants. So this section talks about the tradition of hymnody and poetry. I think that's how you pronounce that. The Church's hymns are more than songs. They are profound meditations on the mysteries of faith, crafted with care and artistry. Through their words and melodies, they lift the soul and engage the mind. And then down the page, it says, poetry allows for an exploration of the divine that transcends the limits of prose. So there's a section that talks about modern efforts in language revitalization. It says, Syriac, once a dominant language of worship and scholarship, is now at risk of fading as younger generations adopt dominant regional and global languages. Agreed. So the way the Assyrian Church of the East uses Syriac is the same way that the Catholic Church uses Latin. And, the Eastern Orthodox uses Greek. Latin is a dying language. I believe Syriac may be also a dying language. The Catholic Church kind of did away with most of the use of Latin in the liturgy in 1969. Even though they weren't supposed to do that, the Vatican II documents clearly state that we should continue to use Latin in our liturgical divine worships, that the product of modernization kind of did away with that. But the Assyrian Church of the East is going through the same thing the Catholic Church is with Syriac. So I agree with that. Here's one more pink highlight that I forgot about. It says, in China, the faith took root during the Tang Dynasty, when missionaries known as Nestorians arrived in the capital. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but it's a capital. It's a capital in China, and I highlighted it and I wrote reject Nestorianism. I agree. Nestorianism is a heresy in the Catholic Church, and in a lot of churches. I think the Assyrian Church of the East is the only one that doesn't have a problem with this Nestorianism, as far as I know. I mean, it's important to know your roots. Know that Nestorian missionaries were kind of the beginning of the Assyrian Church of the East. But this whole paragraph, it doesn't say anything about rejecting Nestorianism. So that's why I highlighted that and I said, reject it. So later on in the book, it talks about relationship with the Roman Catholic Church, the Assyrian Churches of the East's relationship with the Roman Catholic Church. It says, in 1994, the common Christological declaration between the Catholic Church and the Assyrian Church of the East represented a milestone. I highlighted this because I really like that. And I also wanted to look it up later and read it. This common Christological declaration. I still haven't done that yet, but I will get on it as soon as possible. There's a section that talks about historical shifts in church administration. It says the establishment of the Catholicos Patriarch marked a significant step toward unifying the church under a single leadership. As a Catholic, I agree with that. It's important that you have one single earthly leader that can unify the church. And in the Assyrian Church of the East, it's the Catholicos Patriarch. That's one difference that the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church have issue with. They believe that, I think they have 9 patriarchs, and they believe that they are all equal and they all have the same amount of power. And it's hard to keep a church together that way. You should have one that is the sole leader and the sole unifier. And sometimes the ecumenical patriarch in the Eastern Orthodox Church tries to step up into that role, and it makes the other 8 patriarchs very angry with him. That's one thing that the Assyrian Church of the East and the Catholic Church agree on, is having one leader that is above all the rest to unify the church and keep it one. Here's something small. It talks about major diaspora communities worldwide. It says in the United States, cities like Chicago and San Diego have become key centers for the Assyrian Church of the East. I have also seen that. So one of the things that I like to research is I try to find all the different rites of the Catholic Church and where they're most located. There's a lot of Chaldean Catholic churches in Chicago and San Diego, and those are all also centers for the Assyrian Church of the East. As I said earlier, the Chaldean Catholic Church is the Assyrian Church of the East in full communion with Rome. I think also the Syro-Malabar are also rites that came from the Assyrian Church of the East in communion with Rome. So I highlighted that. It says across the Middle East, smaller diaspora pockets continue to persist, particularly in Lebanon and Jordan, where displaced Assyrians find solidarity amidst the challenges of being a minority in a majority culture. So yeah, there's a lot of non-Christians over there in the Middle East. The Assyrian Church of the East are a pretty big community over there. So are the Maronite Catholics and the Chaldean Catholics. And yeah, a lot of people don't think about them because they think about that Islam is pretty dominant over there, but there are Christian communities over there. So yeah, that's my review of the Assyrian Church of the East, a beginner's guide. I really enjoyed it. It was a good read. Really opened my eyes to the Assyrian Church of the East. You never know, I might visit one day. I think the closest community is in Dallas. They meet in a Ukrainian Catholic church, surprisingly. So the Catholic Church and the Assyrian Church have a great relationship. We acknowledge their apostolic succession and their sacraments. Yeah, that's my review. I hope you liked it. Thanks.